I gave them everything, but tonight I discovered that my own children had already written me off. The thought didn't arrive in a whisper, it crashed into my mind with the force of a physical blow, a sudden, cold clarity that stole the air from my lungs. One moment, I was standing in the warm, honeyed light of my kitchen, the familiar scent of sugar and vanilla a comforting blanket around me. The next, I was a stranger in my own life, looking in from a great, unbridgeable distance. On the butcher block in front of me sat the cake. It was a 3-layer vanilla bean sponge with a lemon curd filling and a Swiss meringue buttercream frosting, a confection of love and patience. For hours, my world had been narrowed to this sweet, edible project. My hands, wrinkled and spotted with the map of 70 years, had been surprisingly steady as I'd smoothed the snowy peaks of frosting, my movements practiced and sure. The final touch, a single, delicate sugar rose, trembled slightly as I placed it in the center. A perfect symbol for my granddaughter, Lily, my rose, on the day of her college graduation. I had been humming, a tuneless, happy little sound that had been the soundtrack to my domestic life for as long as I could remember. It was the sound of contentment, of purpose. My purpose, for 50 years, had been my family. My husband, Robert, gone 5 years now, had been the sturdy oak, and I, the ivy that softened his edges, that nurtured the acorns until they grew into saplings of their own. David and Sarah. My children. My world. My phone buzzed on the granite countertop, a sharp, intrusive sound that shattered the quiet harmony. I wiped my hands on my apron, a little flutter of anticipation in my chest. It would be them, I thought. David, or maybe Sarah, calling with the final details for tonight. We were supposed to be celebrating Lily's achievement, a milestone I had been looking forward to for months. I'd bought a new dress, a soft periwinkle blue that brought out the silver in my hair. I'd imagined the laughter, the clinking glasses, the proud speeches. I'd imagined holding Lily's hand, feeling the solid weight of her new class ring, a symbol of the future I had helped build for her. The message was from Sarah. My heart did a familiar little leap, the one it always did when one of my children reached out. I smiled as I tapped the screen. The smile froze, then slowly, painfully, dissolved. "Mom, we decided to celebrate without you tonight. Sorry, last-minute changes. Talk later." That was it. Not an explanation. Not a reason. Just a dismissal. A digital pat on the head. My breath caught in my throat. I read the words again, and then a third time, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something kinder, something that made sense. "We decided to celebrate without you." The words were so blunt, so devoid of feeling. Sorry, last-minute changes. What changes? What could possibly have changed so drastically that my presence, the presence of the graduate's grandmother, was no longer required? Talk later. The eternal promise of the busy, a conversation that would never happen, a loose end they had no intention of ever tying up. The warmth in the kitchen suddenly felt oppressive, cloying. The scent of the cake turned sickly sweet. Disappointment was a familiar ache, a dull throb I had learned to live with over the years. Cancelled Sunday dinners because the kids were tired. Forgotten birthdays because of a last-minute work trip. Quick, transactional phone calls where I could hear them typing in the background. I had always made excuses for them. They were busy, their lives were full, their own children demanded so much. I had been the accommodating one, the flexible one, the one who understood. I had shrunk myself, my needs, my feelings, to make more room for them. But this was different. This wasn't a cancellation, it was an exclusion. A deliberate act of omission. The silence in the kitchen was no longer peaceful. It was a vacuum, filled with the unspoken truth of my irrelevance. I leaned against the counter, my knees feeling weak. The sugar rose on the cake seemed to mock me with its pristine, unblemished beauty. It was a tribute to a celebration I was not invited to. A cruel, morbid curiosity propelled my fingers. I opened my social media app, a place I usually visited only to see pictures of my grandchildren. I navigated to David's page. And there it was. A new photo, posted just 15 minutes ago. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. The picture was aglow with the cheerful, noisy ambience of a fancy downtown restaurant. There was David, my son, his arms slung around his wife, both of them beaming at the camera. There was Sarah, my daughter, raising a glass of champagne, her mouth open in a silent peal of laughter. And in the center, radiant in her cap and gown, was Lily. They were all there. My entire family, my husband's brother, my sister-in-law, their children. Everyone. Smiling. Celebrating. Without me. A wave of nausea washed over me. It wasn't that they had forgotten. It wasn't a last-minute change. It was a plan. A plan that did not include me. I zoomed in on the photo, my hand trembling so badly the image blurred. I could see the details. The menus on the table. The bread basket. The joyful, oblivious faces of the people I had dedicated my entire existence to. They hadn't just forgotten to invite me, they had actively chosen to leave me out. I felt a profound, hollowing crash inside my chest. It was the sound of a lifetime of illusions shattering into a million pieces. The illusion that my sacrifices were seen, that my love was valued, that my role in the family was cherished. In their bright, happy world, captured in a square of digital light, I was not just absent, I was non-existent. They had already moved on. They had written me off. The woman who baked their birthday cakes, who nursed their fevers, who mortgaged her own future for theirs, was now just an afterthought, a loose end to be dealt with later. I looked from the glowing screen of my phone to the perfect, useless cake on my counter. The late afternoon sun cast a long shadow across the kitchen floor, and in that moment, I felt an icy chill that had nothing to do with the setting sun. It was the chilling realization that you can give someone your whole life, and they can take it, and still not have a place for you at their table. The humming in my heart had stopped. And in its place, a terrible, vast silence began to grow. What do you do when the people you live for decide they can live without you? The silence of that evening stretched into the following days, a thick, suffocating fog that seeped into the very walls of my house. The cake sat on the counter, a magnificent monument to my foolishness, until I finally threw it away, the thud of it landing in the trash can echoing the finality of my awakening. That picture, that single, smiling photograph, had become a brand on my memory. It wasn't just an image, it was a verdict. It played on a loop in my mind, each viewing peeling back another layer of my carefully constructed denial. I began to see my life not as a tapestry of love and sacrifice, but as a long series of one-sided transactions. My memory, unbidden, started to dredge up the receipts. I remembered the year David decided to launch his tech startup. He was full of dreams and short on capital. Robert and I had just sold my parents' house after they passed, the modest inheritance a small cushion for our own retirement. David came to us, his business plan spread across this very kitchen table, his eyes shining with the fervor of a true believer. "It's a sure thing, Mom," he'd said, his voice brimming with a confidence I so desperately wanted to believe in. "I just need a little seed money. You'll get it all back, tenfold." We gave him almost all of it. Robert had been hesitant, but I had persuaded him. "It's for our son, Rob," I'd argued. "How can we not believe in him?" We put our own dreams on hold, the trip to Italy we'd talked about for years, the new car we desperately needed. We invested in his future instead. The business did well. Eventually David became successful, bought a big house in a gated community, sent his kids to private school. But the money was never paid back. It was never even mentioned again. It had simply been absorbed, a forgotten cost of his success, my contribution erased from the ledger. Then there was Sarah. My beautiful, complicated Sarah. When she and her husband wanted to buy their first house, they couldn't qualify for the mortgage on their own. Their credit was shaky, their down payment too small. So I co-signed. I put my own good name, my own financial security, on the line for them. "It's just a formality, Mom," she assured me, waving a dismissive hand. "We'll be fine." For years, every time the mail came, a knot of anxiety would tighten in my stomach. Was this the month they'd missed a payment? Was this the letter from the bank that would upend my own fragile stability? They never defaulted, thank God, but the weight of that responsibility, the constant, low-grade fear, had been mine alone to carry. It was a silent service, an invisible safety net they never once acknowledged. The sacrifices weren't just financial. They were temporal, emotional, spiritual. I saw a phantom parade of my former selves march through my memory. There was May, the aspiring artist, who packed away her canvases and oils when David was born because there was no time, no space, for such selfish pursuits. The smell of turpentine had been replaced by the smell of baby powder and sour milk. There was May, the book lover, whose reading time dwindled from hours a day to stolen minutes before bed, until even that was surrendered to sheer exhaustion. There was May, the friend, who let vibrant relationships wither because a child's soccer game or a last-minute babysitting request always took precedence. I had been the family's emergency service, the 24/7 support hotline, the unpaid nanny, chef, and therapist. And I had done it all willingly, gladly, believing it was the very definition of a mother's love. I had worn my self-neglect like a badge of honor. I had believed that by erasing myself, I was making them stronger, happier, more whole. Now, sitting in the unnerving quiet of my home, I saw the devastating flaw in my logic. I hadn't made them stronger, I had made them entitled. I hadn't made them more loving, I had taught them that my love required nothing in return. I had taught them that I was not a person with needs and desires of my own, but a resource to be drawn upon, a utility to be used. The refrigerator, covered in photos of their smiling faces, seemed to mock me. I had curated a museum of their lives while my own had been relegated to a dusty storage room. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the oven door. The woman staring back was a stranger. Her face was a road map of worry lines, her shoulders were stooped with a weight I was only now beginning to identify, and her eyes were hollow. They were the eyes of someone who had given away so many pieces of herself that there was barely anything left. The vibrant, passionate young woman who loved art and poetry and long walks in the rain was gone. In her place was this faded, tired replica. And for what? For the privilege of being cropped out of the family picture. The bitterness was a physical taste in my mouth, sharp and acidic. It was the taste of decades of swallowed words, of ignored needs, of silent tears. I had been the invisible provider, the silent partner in their lives, and the cost of that invisibility was my own soul. I had allowed myself to become a ghost in my own story, and now I was being haunted by the life I had never lived. The fog of silence wasn't just around me anymore, it was inside me. A dense, chilling accumulation of unspoken grief. But as the days bled into one another, something else began to stir within that fog. Not warmth, not yet, but a tiny, sharp spark of anger. And with it, a terrifying, electrifying question: what if I refused to be invisible anymore? The house grew quieter, or perhaps I just became more attuned to the nuances of its silence. It wasn't empty. It was filled with the ghosts of laughter from Christmases past, the echoes of Robert's booming voice, the phantom patter of small feet. But now, these memories were tinged with a new sadness. They were artifacts from a life I had believed in, a life whose foundations had been revealed as sand. Loneliness became my constant companion, a heavy cloak I wore from the moment I woke up until I fell into a restless sleep. It was in the small moments that the isolation was most acute. I'd be in the grocery store, pushing my cart down the aisle, and I would automatically reach for David's favorite brand of coffee or the gluten-free crackers Sarah preferred, my hands moving with the muscle memory of a lifetime of catering to others. Then I would stop, my hand hovering in midair, a bitter smile touching my lips as I remembered. I didn't need to buy those things anymore. I would put them back on the shelf, and the empty space in my cart felt like a chasm. I tried to call them. I waited a week, letting my anger cool into a sort of bruised resignation. I told myself I needed to be the bigger person, to understand. I called David first. It went straight to voicemail. "Hi, David, it's Mom. Just calling to say hello. Hope you're all well." The message sounded pathetic even to my own ears, thin and needy. He didn't call back. A day later, a text message appeared. "Hey mom. Super swamped at work. All good here. Chat soon." The same empty promise. I tried Sarah next. She answered, but her voice was rushed, distracted. "Hi, Mom, can I call you back? I'm in the middle of getting the kids ready for soccer." I could hear the chaos in the background, a child whining, another shouting. "Of course, dear," I said, my voice betraying none of the hurt. "I just wanted to. Gotta go, Mom. Love you." And the line went dead. She didn't call back either. Their silence was an answer in itself. They knew I must have been hurt by the graduation dinner, and their strategy was clear: ignore it, and it will go away. Treat Mom's feelings like a temporary storm that will pass if you just stay inside and lock the doors. Their avoidance was more painful than an argument would have been. An argument would have meant my feelings mattered enough to be fought with. This silent treatment rendered them, and me, completely insignificant. One afternoon, I was watering the roses in my garden, a task that had once brought me immense peace. Robert and I had planted these bushes together. Each one had a name. But as I snipped away a deadhead, a wave of profound loneliness washed over me so intensely that I had to sit down hard on the stone bench. I was surrounded by beauty, by the fruits of my labor, but I had no one to share it with. I looked at the two empty chairs on my patio, and the image of Robert sitting there, reading the paper while I gardened, was so vivid it made my chest ache. I found myself talking to him, my voice a low whisper in the fragrant air. "Oh, Rob," I murmured, tears blurring the vibrant reds and pinks of the roses. "You wouldn't believe it. You just wouldn't." The tears started to fall, hot and silent. They weren't just tears for the missed dinner party. They were for every forgotten phone call, every rushed visit, every time I had felt like a piece of furniture in their lives, useful, there, but utterly unseen. They were tears for the woman I had become, so adept at tending to others' gardens that I had forgotten to cultivate my own. The breaking point, the moment that turned my silent tears into silent resolve, came on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. I was walking through the local park, trying to force myself to get some fresh air. The sun was warm, and the air was filled with the happy shrieks of children on the playground. I sat on a bench, watching a young family. The mother was pushing her little girl on a swing, and the father was holding a baby, tickling its chin. They were a perfect portrait of familial bliss. The mother caught the father's eye, and they shared a smile, a private, knowing smile of shared joy and partnership. And in that moment, something inside me cracked. It wasn't envy. It was a profound, soul-deep recognition of what I had lost, and what I had never truly had. I had been a partner, yes, but my partnership had been one of service, not of equals. And with my children, I had been a mother, but I had never demanded to be treated as a whole person. Seeing that simple, shared smile between two people who truly saw each other, I understood with devastating clarity that no one in my life saw me that way anymore. I stood up from the bench, my movements stiff. The tears had stopped. The sadness was still there, a vast, cold ocean inside me, but on its surface, something new was forming. It was hard, and clear, and sharp. It was the beginning of an idea. The walk back to my house felt different. My steps were more deliberate. The silence I returned to was no longer a symbol of their neglect, but a space, an empty canvas. The thought was terrifying, but it was also threaded with a strange, unfamiliar shimmer of possibility. If they had written me out of their story, perhaps it was time I started writing my own. I didn't know what that story would be, or how to even begin. But I knew one thing for certain: it could not be written on my knees. The idea, once it took root, was a fragile thing. It began not with a grand gesture, but with a creak. The creak of the attic ladder being pulled down for the first time in at least 20 years. The air that drifted down was thick with the scent of dust, cedar, and forgotten time. Armed with a flashlight, I ascended into the gloom, my heart thumping with a mixture of trepidation and a strange, unnameable excitement. My mission was simple: I was looking for a ghost. The ghost of the woman I used to be before I became mom. I navigated past stacks of old photo albums, boxes of my children's school projects, a cot that had rocked both David and Sarah to sleep. These were the relics of the life I had built. But I was looking for the relics of the life I had abandoned. And then I saw it, tucked away under a dusty canvas sheet in the far corner. A large, wooden easel, folded flat. Beside it, a heavy wooden art box. My breath caught. I ran my fingers over the smooth, cool wood of the box, my touch reverent. The brass latches were tarnished, but they clicked open with a satisfying snap. The smell that rose to meet me was a resurrection. The sharp, nostalgic perfume of turpentine, the earthy scent of dried oil paints, the faint sweetness of linseed oil. It was the smell of my youth, of my dreams. Inside, everything was just as I had left it. The hardened, unusable tubes of paint, their colors, cadmium yellow, cerulean blue, burnt sienna, still vibrant on the labels. The brushes, their bristles stiff and misshapen. A palette knife, caked with the ghosts of colors mixed for a painting I could no longer recall. Tears pricked my eyes, but these were different from the hot tears of loneliness. These were tears of reunion. I was meeting a part of myself I thought had died long ago. I lifted out a sketchbook. The pages were yellowed and brittle, but the drawings inside were still clear. Charcoal sketches of faces, landscapes from college trips, a detailed study of Robert's hands, done in the early days of our courtship. The girl who had drawn these was passionate, focused, alive. She saw the world in lines and shadows and light. I had forgotten she ever existed. I spent the rest of the day in the attic, surrounded by the evidence of my lost passion. I brought the easel and the box downstairs, cleaning each piece with a soft cloth, polishing the tarnished brass, feeling the solid weight of them in my hands. It felt like an archaeological dig into my own soul. That evening, instead of turning on the television to fill the silence, I sat at the kitchen table with the old sketchbook and a pencil. My first attempt to draw was a disaster. My hand felt clumsy, alien. The lines I made were shaky and uncertain. The connection between my eye, my brain, and my hand was severed, the wire rusted through from decades of disuse. Frustration mounted, a familiar voice in my head whispering that it was too late, that I was too old, that this was a foolish indulgence. I almost listened. I almost closed the book and retreated to the safety of my lonely routine. But then I remembered the smiling faces in that photograph, the casual cruelty of their exclusion. The spark of anger flared again, and this time, it burned away the doubt. I would not be foolish. I would be defiant. I gripped the pencil tighter. I would not draw for an audience, or for praise, or for anyone else. I would draw for the girl in the attic. I would draw for myself. I gave up on trying to create a masterpiece and simply let my hand move. I drew the salt shaker on the table. The curve of a spoon. The wrinkles on my own hand. The drawings were clumsy, amateurish, but with each line, something loosened inside me. It was a whisper of change, a quiet rebellion against the narrative that had been written for me. I was no longer just a mother, a grandmother, a widow. I was a woman with a pencil in her hand. The next day, I drove to the art supply store. Walking through the aisles was like entering a sacred space. The vibrant rainbow of paint tubes, the clean, hopeful smell of new canvases, the promise held in a pristine set of brushes, it was intoxicating. I bought new paints, new brushes, a few small canvases. The expense felt like a radical act of self-care. It was money spent on no one but me. Back home, I set up the easel in the spare bedroom, the one with the best morning light. I squeezed blobs of color onto a new palette, a brilliant, defiant blue, a joyful yellow, a deep, contemplative purple. I dipped the brush, and for the first time in nearly 50 years, I touched it to a canvas. I had no plan. I just painted. I mixed colors, made strokes, created textures. And as I worked, a profound sense of peace began to settle over me. The silence of the house was no longer a vacuum of loneliness, it was a sanctuary of concentration. The finished painting was a mess. an abstract swirl of colors that meant nothing to anyone but me. But it wasn't nothing. It was a beginning. It was a sunrise. As I stepped back to look at it, a real smile, the first genuine smile in weeks, touched my lips. It was small. It was imperfect. But it was mine. And in that splash of color, I saw the first hint of a new May, a woman I was only just beginning to meet. The question now was not if I could change, but what would happen when the world I had built, and the people in it, noticed. The shift was subtle at first, a quiet change in the rhythm of my days. My mornings were no longer spent waiting by the phone, but in the sun-drenched spare room, which I now called my studio. The air in there smelled of linseed oil and fresh coffee. It was my space, a territory I was claiming for myself, inch by inch. The transformation began to spill into the rest of my life. I started taking long walks again, not just to the park, but through the wooded trails I had loved as a girl. I bought books of poetry and read them on my patio, letting the words wash over me. I was slowly, tentatively, refilling the well I had allowed to run dry. The first test of my new resolve came, as I knew it would, in the form of a phone call. It was David. His tone was casual, breezy, as if no time had passed, as if no wound had been inflicted. "Hey, Mom. How's it going?" "I'm well, David. How are you?" I kept my own voice even, calm. It felt like a small victory. "Good, good. Listen, quick favor. Jen and I have a chance to go to this charity dinner tonight. It's a big networking thing for her firm. We're in a real bind for a sitter. Could you pop over around 6? The kids are dying to see you." There it was. The old script. The casual assumption of my availability. The deployment of the grandchildren as emotional bait. The old May would have dropped everything. Her own plans, her own feelings, would have been instantly disposable. The old May would have felt a surge of pleasure at being needed, even in this perfunctory way. But I was not the old May. I took a breath. "I'm sorry, David, but I can't tonight." There was a beat of stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Oh. Why not? Everything okay?" The question wasn't born of concern, but of sheer confusion. My no was an unexpected data point, an error in his system. "Everything is fine," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering. "I have plans." "Plans?" He sounded genuinely baffled. "What plans?" I didn't owe him an explanation, but I gave him a simple, honest one. "I'm painting. I've set aside my evenings for my artwork." The silence that followed was even longer. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, trying to process this information. His mother, whose life revolved around his needs, had plans. And those plans involved painting? "Oh," he said again, his voice flat. "Okay. Well, that's nice. I guess I'll have to call a service then. It's just so expensive. We'll talk soon, Mom." The line clicked dead. He wasn't angry, not yet. He was just perplexed, as if his ATM had suddenly refused to dispense cash. The backlash began a few days later, this time from Sarah. She called, her voice tight with a manufactured sweetness that always set my teeth on edge. She started with small talk, asking about my garden, a topic she had never shown interest in before. Then came the real reason for the call. "So, Mom, things are a little tight this month. You know, with Lily's tuition payment and everything. I was wondering if you could maybe help us out a little? Just a small loan, to tide us over." This was another familiar dance. The small loan that was never repaid. In the past, I would have dipped into my meager savings without a second thought, feeling the familiar pinch of anxiety but telling myself it was for my daughter. "Sarah, I can't right now," I said. My voice didn't waver. "What? Why not?" The sweetness in her tone evaporated instantly, replaced by sharp-edged disbelief. "Don't tell me you're still doing that painting thing?" The way she said painting thing made it sound like a childish, frivolous whim. "Yes, I am," I said. "And art supplies are quite expensive. I'm budgeting carefully because it's important to me." "Important to you?" Her laugh was short and humorless. "Mom, what is going on with you? David said you wouldn't even babysit for him. We're your family. We're supposed to be what's important to you. Are you seriously choosing some new hobby over your own children?" The accusation stung, a sharp, deliberate dart of guilt. This was their primary weapon, the one they had honed over years of use. It had always worked before. It had always sent me scurrying back into my box, apologetic and eager to please. But this time, something was different. The pain of her words was real, but it was overshadowed by the memory of that photograph. Of their smiling, exclusive celebration. "You are important to me, Sarah," I said, and my voice was colder than I intended. "But I am important to me, too." For the first time in a very long time, her response was a torrent of indignation. I was being selfish. I had changed. I wasn't the mother she knew. She didn't understand what had gotten into me. The conversation ended with her hanging up on me, her frustration a palpable force humming through the dead line. I put the phone down, my hand trembling. My new boundaries were being tested, and the resistance was fierce. I felt shaken, bruised, and terribly alone. The easy path would be to call them back, to apologize, to smooth things over, to go back to being the person they wanted me to be. The temptation was immense. But then I looked into my studio. I saw the half-finished canvas on the easel, a landscape of a stormy sea. I saw the wild, turbulent colors, but I also saw a sliver of light breaking through the clouds on the horizon. I had built the wall, and now they were pushing against it. And for the first time in my life, I had to decide if I was strong enough not to let it crumble. The house felt like a battlefield after that phone call. The silence was no longer peaceful, it was tense, fraught with the echoes of Sarah's angry words. "Selfish. You've changed. You're not the mother I knew." The accusations ricocheted around my mind, each one a poisoned arrow finding its mark. A part of me, the part conditioned by 50 years of self-abnegation, wanted to believe her. Was I being selfish? Was it wrong to finally put my own needs, my own nascent dreams, on the same level as theirs? The dot was a cold, creeping vine, threatening to choke the fragile new growth inside me. For 2 days, I couldn't bring myself to enter the studio. The smell of paint, which had so recently felt like liberation, now seemed to mock me. Who was I, at 70 years old, to suddenly declare myself an artist? Who was I to deny my family, the very purpose I had built my life around? On the third day, I knew I had to do something. The quiet of the house was becoming a prison. I couldn't let them win this war of attrition. Their strategy was clear: isolate me, make me feel guilty, and wait for me to surrender and return to my designated role. But if I did that, I would be betraying not just myself, but the memory of the woman I was rediscovering. I decided to force the issue. I wasn't going to let this fester in silence any longer. I sent a simple text message to both David and Sarah: "I'm making pot roast on Sunday. Please come at 2 p.m. We need to talk." The choice of pot roast was deliberate. It was the ultimate comfort food, the meal I had made for countless family gatherings. It was a symbol of the mother they knew. But this time, it would be served with a side of truth. They both agreed to come, their curiosity likely outweighing their resentment. Sunday arrived, heavy with anticipation. As I prepared the meal, my hands moved with their old, familiar rhythm, but my mind was racing. I rehearsed what I wanted to say, trying to find words that were strong but not accusatory, honest but not bitter. They arrived separately, their greetings stiff and formal. The easy warmth that had once filled my home was gone, replaced by a strained politeness. We sat at the dining room table, the pot roast steaming between us, an aromatic ghost of happier times. For a while, we engaged in meaningless small talk: the weather, their jobs, the kids' latest achievements. The air was thick with unspoken things. Finally, I put down my fork. "I asked you here because I need to say something," I began, my voice quieter than I intended, but clear. "And I need you to just listen. Please." They both looked at me, their expressions wary. "For my entire adult life," I said, looking from David to Sarah, "my primary focus has been the two of you. and then your families. And I don't regret that love. I don't regret the care I gave you. But somewhere along the way, I disappeared. I became a function. I was mom the babysitter, mom the bank, mom the cook. I ceased to be May, a person with her own hopes and feelings. I took a shaky breath and pressed on, the words tumbling out now. The night of Lily's graduation. That was a turning point for me. To be so completely and deliberately excluded by my own family. It broke something inside me. But it also opened my eyes. I saw that I had allowed myself to become invisible. I had taught you that my time, my resources, and my feelings were endlessly available and ultimately, not very valuable. David shifted in his chair, opening his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. Please. Just let me finish. He closed his mouth, his jaw tight. Sarah stared down at her plate, refusing to meet my eyes. When I say no to you now, I continued, it is not because I don't love you. It is because I am finally learning to love myself. My painting is not a silly hobby. It is me, reclaiming a piece of my soul that I packed away when you were born. When I say I can't give you money, it's not to punish you. It's because I need to secure my own future, a future that I am now, for the first time, planning for myself. I looked at them, my heart aching with the weight of my own words. I know this is a change. I know it's uncomfortable. But the person you're used to, the woman who would erase herself for your comfort, she can't live here anymore. She's gone. And I need to know if you can find a way to make room in your lives for the person who is here now. For May, the silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. David was frowning, a look of deep, defensive anger on his face. Sarah was crying, silent tears rolling down her cheeks and onto her napkin. It was David who broke the silence, his voice sharp with indignation. So that's it? You're just checking out? After everything we've been through as a family, you're just deciding to be selfish? Painting is more important than your own grandchildren? It's not about being selfish, David, I pleaded. It's about being a person. It sounds pretty selfish to me, he shot back. Mom, this is ridiculous. You're our mother. This is what mothers do. The pain of his words was a physical blow. He wasn't just disagreeing, he was fundamentally invalidating my entire experience, my entire plea for personhood. He was reinforcing the very role I was trying to escape. Sarah finally looked up, her eyes red and swollen. I don't understand, Mom, she whispered. Why didn't you ever say anything before? It was a genuine question, but it was also a deflection. A way of shifting the blame back onto me. Because I didn't know how, I said, my voice cracking. Because I thought my silence was the price of your love. The conversation deteriorated from there. It became a messy, painful exchange of accusations and offenses. They felt I was abandoning them. I felt they had never truly seen me. No resolutions were found. No understanding was reached. They left soon after, the pot roast barely touched. As I closed the door behind them, a profound sense of failure washed over me. I had spoken my truth, and it had shattered us. I was alone in the silence, the smell of the uneaten meal filling the air. The house felt bigger, emptier than ever before. For a moment, I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. Perhaps it was better to be an invisible provider than to be completely and utterly alone. But as I stood there, surrounded by the wreckage of our confrontation, a different feeling began to surface from beneath the pain. It was a strange, steely calm. I had stood in the heart of the storm and I had not been broken. My voice had been shaking, but I had not been silenced. My resolve, tested by their full-on emotional assault, was wounded. But it had helped. I had lost the battle, but I was beginning to think I might still win the war for my own soul. In the aftermath of that disastrous Sunday dinner, a new kind of silence descended. It was no longer the silence of neglect, but the charged, deliberate silence of a standoff. There were no calls, no texts. It was as if by speaking my truth, I had severed the final, frayed thread that connected us. The first week was agony. Every time the phone rang, My heart would leap, only to sink when it was a telemarketer or a friend. I fought the overwhelming urge to call them, to apologize, to smooth over the chasm I had opened. The old May, the peacemaker, screamed at me to fix it. But the new May, the one holding a paintbrush, whispered, "Wait. Give them space. Give yourself space." So I did. I threw myself into my art with a desperate, ferocious energy. The studio became my sanctuary, my lifeboat. When the loneliness felt like a physical weight, I would mix a vibrant, defiant dread and slash it across a canvas. When the words of my children echoed in my head, I would lose myself in the intricate details of a still life, focusing on the way light hit a glass bottle until the world outside my window faded away. My art became my voice, my diary, my therapist. The canvases began to fill up with my rage, my sorrow, my confusion, and, surprisingly, my hope. I painted the stormy sea I had imagined, but this time, the sliver of light was bigger, bolder. I painted my rose garden, but instead of pristine, perfect blooms, they were wild, thorny, and resilient. I knew I couldn't stay locked in my house forever. I needed a connection that wasn't fraught with a lifetime of baggage. On a whim, propelled by a feeling of now or never, I signed up for a community art class at the local arts center. Walking in that first night was one of the most terrifying things I had ever done. The room was filled with people of all ages, all chatting and setting up their easels with an easy confidence. I felt like an imposter, a foolish old woman playing at being an artist. I found a spot in the back corner, my cheeks burning. But then a woman with a shock of bright silver hair and paint-splattered jeans smiled at me. "First night?" she asked, her voice warm and raspy. "Is it that obvious?" I replied, my voice a nervous squeak. She laughed, a wonderful, throaty sound. "Only because you look like a deer in the headlights. Don't worry, we don't bite. I'm Eleanor." "May," I said, a small, grateful smile forming on my face. Eleanor became my first real friend in years. She was a retired history professor, a divorcee, and a wonderfully irreverent, opinionated, and brilliant artist. She looked at my work not with the dismissive air of my children, but with a keen, critical eye. She praised my use of color, suggested new techniques, and talked about art with a passion that reignited my own. For the first time, I was having conversations that weren't about grandchildren, or illnesses, or the good old days. We talked about Matisse and Monet, about politics and books, about the challenges and joys of finding a new path late in life. Through Eleanor, I met others in the class. There was Frank, a retired firefighter who painted delicate watercolors. There was Maria, a young mother who escaped to the studio one night a week for her own sanity. We were a motley crew, united by our shared need to create. My world began to expand. I went to gallery openings with Eleanor, feeling a thrill at being part of that world. I joined a book club. I started going to the local theater's matinee performances. Each small act of engagement was a stitch, mending the holes in my social fabric. I was building a life that was entirely my own, a life where I was not David and Sarah's mother, but simply May. My confidence, both as a person and as an artist, began to bloom. My paintings grew bolder, more assured. I was developing a style that was uniquely mine. The shaky, uncertain lines of my early drawings were replaced by strong, expressive brushstrokes. The woman who looked back at me from the mirror was changing, too. The hollow look in her eyes was being replaced by a spark. Her shoulders weren't as stooped. She smiled more. One evening, after class, Eleanor was looking at a painting I had just finished. It was a self-portrait, but not a literal one. It was my kitchen, bathed in that golden late afternoon light, but the chair at the table was empty, and outside the window, a storm was gathering. It was a picture of loneliness, but also of strength. "May, this is powerful," Eleanor said, her voice soft. "Really powerful. The local arts council is having their annual juried show next month. You have to enter this." My heart did a frantic flip-flop. Oh, no. I couldn't. I'm not good enough. Eleanor turned to me, her gaze direct. "Don't you dare say that. You are more than good enough. That fear you're feeling? That's the old you talking. The new you, the artist, knows this deserves to be seen. Stop hiding your light, May. It's time to let it shine. Her words hit me with the force of a revelation. She was right. Hiding was the old way. Fear was the old way. Saying no to myself was the old way. I had reinvented my life in private, now it was time to take it public. The next day, with trembling hands, I filled out the application form for the art show. It felt like the biggest risk I had ever taken, far bigger than co-signing a loan or funding a business. This time, the thing I was putting on the line was not my money or my credit. It was my soul. The weeks leading up to the art show were a blur of nervous energy and focused work. I framed the painting of my kitchen, the one Eleanor had insisted I enter, giving it a simple, elegant black frame that seemed to amplify its quiet intensity. The official title was Golden Hour. Dropping it off at the gallery felt like leaving a piece of my heart behind a counter. The idea that strangers would be looking at it, judging it, was both terrifying and exhilarating. I didn't tell David or Sarah about the show. The silence between us had stretched for over 2 months now, a vast, unbroken expanse. The pain of our estrangement was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of my new life. But I was also fiercely protective of this new life. I didn't want their potential judgment or dismissiveness to tarnish this milestone. This was for me. The night of the opening reception, Eleanor picked me up. I wore my periwinkle blue dress, the one I had bought for Lily's graduation celebration. Tonight, I was reclaiming it. It would no longer be a symbol of my exclusion, but a symbol of my own debut. The gallery was buzzing with people, a sophisticated murmur of conversation and clinking wine glasses. I felt a surge of panic, seeing all the incredible artwork on the walls. There were stunning photographs, intricate sculptures, masterful oil paintings. My little canvas felt impossibly small and insignificant in comparison. We found my painting hanging in a small alcove. And in front of it, a small, red sticker was affixed to the wall label. "May," Eleanor whispered, grabbing my arm. "Do you see that?" "What?" "The red dot," I asked, my voice trembling. "Yes, the red dot," she said, her eyes shining. "The red dot means it's been sold." I stared at her, then at the dot, then back at her. Sold? Someone had looked at my painting, my quiet expression of loneliness and nascent strength, and they had wanted to own it? They had seen the value in it? I felt my knees go weak. Eleanor hugged me tightly. "I told you," she whispered in my ear. "I told you." As if that weren't enough, a few moments later, a woman with a press pass and a kind smile approached me. "Are you Maeve Connolly?" she asked. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "I'm with the local paper," she said. "I'm writing a piece on the show. I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions." "Your piece? It's the talk of the evening. The judges awarded it an honorable mention." "Honorable mention." "Sold." I felt like I was floating, disconnected from my own body. I answered her questions in a daze, talking about my journey back to art late in life, about what inspired the painting. I didn't mention my family drama, I simply said it was about a time of profound transition. The article came out 2 days later. It was a small piece, tucked into the arts section of the Sunday paper, but to me, it was front-page news. There was a photo of me, smiling, standing next to Golden Hour. The headline read, "Local grandmother finds second act through art." I knew they would see it. David and Sarah both subscribed to the digital version of the paper. I spent the day in a state of high anxiety, waiting for the inevitable reaction. Would it be anger? Indifference? The call came late in the afternoon. It was Sarah. Her voice was hesitant, fragile. "Mom." "Hi, Sarah." I saw the article." There was a long pause. "The painting, Mom. It's our kitchen." "Yes," I said softly. I never realized," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I never thought about how you must have felt that night. We were so wrapped up in ourselves. I'm so sorry, Mom." The apology, when it finally came, was so simple, so direct, that it took my breath away. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't an excuse. It was just an apology. "I'm really proud of you," she added, her voice breaking on the last word. Tears sprang to my eyes. This was not the reaction I had braced myself for. My public recognition had somehow given them a new lens through which to see me. It was as if the validation of strangers, the red dot, the honorable mention, the newspaper article, had finally allowed them to comprehend the neglect they had been blind to for so long. They hadn't been able to hear my voice, but they could read the newspaper. Later that evening, an email arrived from David. It was long and rambling. He wrote about how seeing the picture of me in the paper, looking so happy and so independent, had shocked him. He admitted that he had always seen me as an extension of his own life, a permanent fixture in the background, and he was beginning to understand how wrong that was. The email was clumsy and full of his own justifications, but buried within it was the seed of remorse. It ended with, "I guess I don't really know you at all, Mom. Maybe I'd like to. Can I come see your studio sometime?" I sat there, in the quiet of my living room, the newspaper spread out on the coffee table. The recognition from the outside world was wonderful, a balm to my bruised ego. But this tentative, fragile reaching out from my own children, this was something else entirely. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't a magical fix. But it was a beginning. It was the first sign of a thaw in the long, cold winter of our estrangement. For the first time, they weren't just taking notice. They were beginning, just beginning, to see. The path to reconciliation was not a straight line. It was a winding, often awkward, journey of rediscovery. The first step was David's visit to my studio. He came alone on a Saturday morning, a peace offering of coffee and pastries in his hands. He stood in the doorway of the spare room, looking around with a sense of wonder, as if he'd discovered a secret wing of a house he thought he knew completely. "Wow, Mom," he said, his voice quiet. "You did all this?" He walked around the room, looking at the canvases leaning against the walls. He saw the stormy seas, the thorny roses, the abstract explosions of color. He was seeing, for the first time, a visual record of my inner life for the past few months. It was a language he was unaccustomed to, but he was trying to understand. "I had no idea," he said, turning to me. His usual armor of confidence was gone, replaced by a vulnerability I hadn't seen since he was a small boy. "I'm sorry. For the graduation dinner. Well, for everything. For not seeing you." I just nodded, my heart too full for words. We sat for over an hour, drinking the coffee he brought. He didn't ask for anything. He just asked questions. He asked about my art class, about Eleanor, about what it felt like to sell a painting. He was trying to get to know me. It was clumsy and hesitant, like a first date, but it was real. My conversation with Sarah was different, more emotionally charged. She came over one afternoon, and we sat on the patio, surrounded by the roses. She cried, and I held her hand. She talked about the pressures of her own life, not as an excuse, but as an explanation for her own self-absorption. "I always just assumed you were fine, Mom," she said, wiping her eyes. "You were always the strong one, the one who handled everything. It never occurred to me that you might need us to handle you for a change. We took you for granted. I took you for granted." In that moment, I saw her not just as my daughter, but as a woman struggling with her own burdens, her own imperfections. My anger, which had been a protective shield for so long, finally dissolved, replaced by a wave of compassion. "I should have spoken up sooner," I admitted. "I had a role in this, too. I taught you that my needs didn't matter." It was a pivotal conversation. We weren't just assigning blame, we were acknowledging our shared responsibility in the dynamic that had almost broken us. We were starting to build a new kind of relationship, one based not on silent assumptions and unspoken obligations, but on honest communication. The true testament to our new beginning came a month later. The Arts Council, pleased with the success of the juried show, offered me a small, solo exhibition at the community gallery. It was an incredible honor, a dream I would have never dared to have just a few months prior. When I told the kids, Their reaction was immediate and unequivocal. "That's amazing, Mom," David said. "We have to celebrate. We'll all be there. Front row." "We'll handle everything," Sarah added. "Invitations, food, everything. You just focus on your art." And they did. They organized a beautiful opening night reception. They invited all their friends, their colleagues, my extended family. They spoke about me with a pride that brought tears to my eyes. They didn't introduce me as our mom. They introduced me as May Connolly, the artist. The bridges were not just rebuilt, they were re-engineered, with stronger materials and a better design. They were built on a foundation of mutual respect. My children started calling just to talk. They asked about my day, my paintings, my friends. They shared their own struggles, not as problems for me to solve, but as equals sharing their lives. We had family dinners, but now they were a collaboration. Sometimes we ate at my house, sometimes at theirs. Sometimes, we just went out to a restaurant, all of us together. The change was most apparent with my granddaughter, Lily. She came to my studio one afternoon, her eyes wide with a newfound respect. She looked at Golden Hour, which the buyer had graciously loaned back for the exhibition. "Grandma," she said, her voice soft. "I'm so sorry we hurt you. I saw the article, and I read what you said about a time of transition. I think I understand now. This painting makes me sad, but it also makes me feel strong." Her words were the greatest gift of all. The next generation was learning a different lesson. She was learning that a woman, a mother, a grandmother, was a whole person, with a rich, complex inner life that deserved to be seen and celebrated. The cycle of silent sacrifice was being broken. We were building a new legacy, one of empathy and understanding. The night of my solo exhibition was the culmination of everything. The gallery was filled to capacity, a warm, happy buzz of conversation filling the space. My paintings were on the walls, a vibrant, emotional timeline of my journey from desolation to discovery. Each canvas was a chapter in my story, the quiet loneliness of my kitchen, the turbulent fury of a stormy sea, the resilient beauty of my thorny roses, and finally, a series of bright, abstract sunrises, each one more hopeful than the last. My new friends from art class were there, beaming with pride. Eleanor stood by my side, her arm linked through mine, a co-conspirator in my beautiful rebellion. My children, David and Sarah, moved through the crowd, not as the center of the universe, but as my proud, supportive entourage. They refilled glasses, introduced me to their friends, and spoke of my work with genuine admiration. I stood in the center of the room, a glass of champagne in my hand, and simply took it all in. I saw David in a corner, in a deep conversation with Frank, the retired firefighter, about watercolor techniques. I saw Sarah and Lily walking through the gallery, Sarah pointing to a painting and whispering something to her daughter that made Lily smile and look at me with loving eyes. Later in the evening, my son-in-law tapped a glass for attention. David stepped onto a small, makeshift stage. "I just want to say a few words," he began, his voice clear and strong. "For most of my life, I thought I knew my mother. She was the best mom a guy could ask for, caring, supportive, always there. But I realize now, I only knew one part of her. Tonight, we're all getting to see the rest. We're seeing May, the artist. The woman of incredible strength and passion. Mom, we are so unbelievably proud of you. You've taught us that it's never too late to reinvent yourself, to follow a dream, and to teach the people who love you how to see you fully. This show isn't just a collection of beautiful paintings, it's a testament to your strength and your spirit. To our mother, May." The room erupted in applause. My family enveloped me in a group hug, and for the first time in so long, it felt right. It wasn't a hug of obligation or neediness. It was a hug of pure, unadulterated love and respect. As the evening wound down, I found a quiet moment to myself, standing before Golden Hour, the painting that had started it all. I no longer saw just the loneliness in it. I saw the beginning. I saw the turning point. The rejection that had felt like an ending was, in fact, the most profound and necessary beginning of my entire life. I had lost a role I thought I couldn't live without, only to find the person I was truly meant to be. My life was not perfect. There were still moments of friction, old habits that tried to resurface. But now, we had the tools to navigate them. We had a new language, a new understanding. I had my art, my friends, my books, my walks. And I had my family, a family that had learned to love me not for what I could do for them, but for who I was. The strength I had found was not a loud, aggressive force. It was a quiet, deep-rooted serenity. It was the peace that comes from self-acceptance, the joy of a passion rediscovered, and the warmth of relationships rebuilt on a foundation of truth. I had given them everything, yes. But in the end, by choosing myself, I had been given back so much more. I had found my voice, my value, and my own personal masterpiece, a life of my own design. And it was beautiful.